Hi, we're going to try and make a hat with pleats in it today. I've bought 55 centimetres of material, which was an off-cut remnant, and I'm going to make the hat and the lining out of that. So I've placed the main pattern piece on the fold as well as the crown. So I'll have two crowns, one main pattern piece and two for the brim, and then I have another pattern piece over here to your left, which will be the lining piece, and cut that out as well. I've now cut out the pattern pieces, which is the lining, the brim, the pleated sidewall and the crown. Next thing I need to do is make the mark where the pleats are going to be in the pleated sidewall. You can do this by using an awl implement and putting holes through the fabric, or you can do it by putting tailor tacks. I'm going to use tailor tacks in this instance. To make the tailor's tacks, get a threaded needle, double thread, and sew through the pattern on the fold line. So when you remove the paper from the material, you can then have thread there to show you where you're going to fold down to which line. Can you see the threads sticking out where the tailor's tacks have been put through the paper? Now I'm going to remove the paper and clip the threads so that they're on both sides of the fabric, and then next I'll iron the pleat marks in. Can you see the red threads where the tailor's tacks are? Now I'll unfold the material and clip through the back of it so that I have threads on both sides.
Which previously often required open heart surgery. They're able to now do this with the robot, and they can do it remotely. So two hospitals that have the Da Vinci robot can actually undertake.
After stitching the first line, I'm now stitching the second line along its folded edge. I've now sewn in the two 1/2 inch pleats and ironed them flat, and I'm going to sew up the back seam, which has got a 6mm seam or 1/4 inch. After stitching the first line, I'm now stitching the second line along its folded edge. I've decided that I want a saddle stitch look on my hat, so I've threaded the needle with 2 spools of cotton and put through the needle so that I get a double stitched effect. Then along the fold line, I'm sewing a 1/2 inch from the fold line on both the pleats. So I'll sew the top pleat first and then the bottom pleat after that. I've now sewn in the two 1/2 inch pleats and ironed them flat, and I'm going to sew up the back seam, which has got a 6mm seam or 1/4 inch. I've now sewn up the back seam, so you iron it open so it lays nice and flat. The next step is to get the crown, and you're going to fold it into quarters, making sure to make it exact in the way that it's folded, and these quarters then get matched to the brim, to the sidewall of the hat, so that the whole thing goes together very smoothly and accurately. So I'll fold it into quarters. Iron marks now using the iron on these quarter folds. Can you see where I've marked the pattern with pins on the quarter marks? Now I'm going to do the same with the sidewall, and then we'll match those pins up. Can you see the pins in the sidewall? Now I'm going to match these pins to the crown.
How often you are sticking the fork in your mouth. And if you're eating a bit fast, don't bolt your food, Anthony. If you're eating a bit fast, it's a...
Match your pins together and pin around the hat so we putting the pins here.
told you this way down.
And then next we're going to stitch
But I mean, really,
a 1/4 inch away from the
is that
edge.
all anyone can come up with in these smart gadget territory? I got I'm sure you've got a million devices that we need, that are handy, that you come up with in an instant.
Keep pinning around the whole circumference of the crown, and next you're going to stitch. Can you see where I matched the pins together and then sewed the top in? So now that's completed. If you wanted to top stitch that on the outside you could, but the next step for me is to iron it on the inside so I get a nice flat seam. I've tried to iron the seams on the crown down towards the side wall, and I've made my life a bit easier by making one of these handheld kidney shaped orbs to put inside the hat. Makes it easier for ironing, and this one's lasted me for years. The next step is we're going to sew up the peak, and I've cut out an interfacing to put inside the peak. You can interface it on both pieces of fabric if you want a firmer peak, and also top stitching helps to keep the shape. I've interfaced both pieces of fabric by using a fusible interfacing and ironed it to the back of the fabric. Now we'll sew the peak together using 1/4 inch seams or 6mm seams. Stitch along the edge of the peak, 1/4 inch from the edge, 6mm from the edge. Now you turn the brim to the outside and you're going to iron it flat. The peak's now ironed. I'm going to do 3 rows of top stitching on it just to give it extra body and just for a finish, and I'll then attach it to the hat. I'm top stitching a machine foot width away from the edge, and then I'll do a 2nd row of stitching a machine foot away from the first row of stitching. I'm now stitching a couple of millimetres from the top edge of the hat just to hold all the pieces together. Then I'm going to trim any excess interfacing sticking out and attach it to the hat. The peak is now pinned all the way around to the main part of the hat, and we'll just sew that peak onto the main part of the hat using a couple of millimetres seam. Then the next step after that, we'll just make the lining, and the lining is made by sewing the crown to the lining piece, putting it to the hat and turning it inside out, sewing together and then pulling through the back seam. The peak is now being sewn to the main part of the hat, mainly just to secure it, then it'll be finely sewn when the lining goes in. This is how the hat is looking so far. The next step will be to do the lining. The next stage will be to sew the back seam of the lining piece, and then it's going to get folded into quarters, the same as the crown was folded into quarters, and then those quarters will be matched. So when we sew the back seam, we'll leave a small opening to turn the hat through later on. Probably 2-inch opening is the good size to leave, so I'll pin it and indicate it. Can you see where I've left the pins for the opening to turn the hat through later on? Can you see the hole in the back seam, and also the crown's folded into quarters and ironed again, so these quarters are going to be matched onto the lining piece. Fold the lining piece into quarters. First of all here, so this will be matched together there. Put a pin in it and put the pins into it where you folded it into quarters. Then you get that pin and fold that to the back seam and put a pin in this quarter, and then put a pin in this quarter, and then as you can see, the lining piece, this would be the front of your head and back of your head. These are the sides of your head. So this is the back of your head where the back seam is. I'm going to match that quarter here and put a pin in it, hold the two together. Then I find the next ironed mark and match it to the next pin, pin it together. Then I find the following iron mark, put it to the next pin, pin it together, and then the final ironed mark, put together with the pin, and we have the crown and sidewall pinned together. Then you put more pins here and sew a 1/4 inch away from the edge. The crown's now pinned to the sidewall and we'll sew it 1/4 inch away from the edge. Now we'll sew the main hat to the lining at 1/4 inch seams, the seam allowance used on your pattern. Now I've got the completed lining piece and the hat. I'm going to attach the two pieces together and turn out right side out through the hole in the back seam. So we want right sides together. We match the back seam to the back seam on the main hat and place a pin in it, and then we continue to pin all the way around. Pull the hat through the back seam.
Labor and the Greens have dismissed calls from some sections of the Liberal Party for an overhaul.
The lining's now turned right through and we'll sew up the hole in the back seam. We'll iron the hat so it's got a good finish on it, and we'll tack in place at several locations along the hat so that the lining stays in position. The hat has been sewn up on the inside where the opening was, just hand stitched, and it's now completed after being ironed. You could trim it with some buttons or buckles or belt if you wanted to. Buttons look nice along this side seam.